The sun was going down behind the cracked roofs of the alien colony, painting the dusty streets in dull red light. The human walked alone, his boots sinking in the soft dirt. He had lived here for months, long enough to know that no one trusted him. The aliens stared at him with cold eyes, whispered behind his back, and sometimes threw stones at his door at night. He was used to being the outsider. But he stayed because he had nowhere else to go. Work was scarce, food was scarce, and friends were even scarcer. He stopped when he heard the sound of something moving near the trash piles at the edge of the street. He turned his head and saw a tiny figure crouched low, her hands digging through old scraps. It was a young alien girl, thin and dirty, her clothes torn and hanging off her small frame. She was pulling apart an old piece of cloth, searching for crumbs stuck inside. Her big eyes glowed faintly in the fading light, desperate and hungry. She did not notice him at first. The human reached into his coat and felt the last piece of bread he had saved from his own dinner. He had been planning to eat it later, but as he watched the girl lick dust from her fingers, something stirred in him. He remembered how hunger had felt when he had nothing. Slowly, he walked forward. His steps made the girl freeze, her head snapping up in fear. She pressed her back against the wall, ready to run. To her, humans were dangerous, strange, and sometimes cruel. She did not know what he wanted. He crouched down and held out the bread with an open hand. The girl stared at it, her eyes flicking between his face and the food. Her lips trembled. She wanted it, but she was afraid it might be a trick. The human stayed still, letting the silence hang between them. Finally, her hunger won. She rushed forward, snatched the bread, and tore into it with sharp teeth. She ate so quickly that crumbs fell to the ground. For a moment, she forgot her fear. She chewed and swallowed, her throat working hard as if she hadn't eaten in days. The human smiled faintly. "Easy," he murmured, though he knew she might not understand his words. Still, his tone was gentle, not mocking. When the last piece was gone, she licked her fingers clean and looked at him with wide eyes. Her breathing slowed, and something strange happened. She did not run away. Instead, she tilted her head and studied him, as if trying to solve a puzzle. "You're kind," she said in her broken, halting voice. Her accent was heavy, the words not smooth, but he understood. He was surprised she spoke his language at all. Before he could answer, she added something that made his stomach twist. "I think my mother would be perfect for you." The human blinked. For a second, he thought he had heard wrong. A little alien girl, just fed with bread, was now offering him her mother. It sounded absurd, almost like a joke. But her face was serious. She was not laughing. Her small hands clutched the torn hem of her clothes, her eyes steady and clear. There was no hint of play in her tone. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Why would she say such a thing? Why would a child look at a stranger, an alien outsider, and suggest something so bold? The silence stretched between them again. The girl's gaze did not waver. She seemed to be weighing his reaction, testing if he would mock her or strike her down. But he did neither. At last, he asked quietly, "Why would you say that?" His voice was calm, though his heart was restless inside. The girl's answer came quickly, without hesitation. "Because you gave me food. No one gives us food. Only someone good would do this. My mother is alone. She needs someone good." Her small voice was sharp with truth, like she had been holding it inside for a long time. The human's chest tightened. He could see the cracks in her words, the pain behind them. Her mother was alone, rejected, maybe just as hungry as she was. He thought of his own loneliness, the cold nights when no one knocked on his door, no one cared if he lived or died. A strange warmth touched him, mixed with unease. He had not expected this moment when he handed her that bread. He had only wanted to ease her hunger, yet now she had given him something heavier, hope, or maybe responsibility. The girl wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and took a deep breath. Then she reached out with her tiny fingers and tugged at his sleeve. "Come," she said, almost commanding. "You must see her." Her grip was weak but determined. She pulled, as if her thin body could drag him across the colony. For a moment, he stayed still, staring at her. Then curiosity and a strange pull inside him made him follow. As they walked down the narrow alleys, other aliens watched. Some sneered, others whispered. A few spat on the ground as he passed, their eyes full of disgust. He felt the heat of their hatred but ignored it. The girl held his sleeve tightly, her small steps quick. She seemed unbothered by the stares. She had decided something, and she would not let go. At the edge of the colony, where the homes were broken and the walls cracked, she stopped. She pointed to a small shelter made of bent metal and torn cloth. Smoke curled weakly from a hole in the roof. The human's eyes fell on a figure kneeling by a dying fire. It was a woman, tall for her kind, though her shoulders were bent with weight. Her clothes were patched, her hair tangled, her face tired. Yet even in the dim light, he saw her strength. She moved slowly, carefully, shielding a small pot of boiling water as if it was the most precious treasure in the world. The girl released his sleeve and ran to her, hugging her side. "Mother," she said with a bright voice, "this is him, the one I told you about." The woman lifted her head, her eyes meeting the human's. They were sharp, guarded, but behind the hardness was something else, a deep sadness, the kind carried for years. The air grew heavy. He did not know what to say. She did not know why he was standing there. But in that silence, something powerful had begun, and none of them could step back from it now. The girl's small hand was still wrapped around the human's sleeve as she pulled him closer to the broken shelter. The woman inside turned, her eyes narrowing as soon as she saw him. Her gaze was cold, sharp like a blade, the kind that warned him he was not welcome here. The girl, however, ignored her mother's look of disapproval. She pointed at him and said firmly, "He gave me food, Mother. He should be with you." The words hit the air like a stone dropped in still water. The mother froze, her mouth parting slightly, not from joy but from shock. The human felt his chest tighten, her words made his heart pound uncomfortably. Around them, a few neighbors had gathered, drawn by the unusual sight of a human standing at the widow's door. Their whispers began quickly, harsh and mocking. "Look at her," one alien man chuckled, folding his arms. "So desperate she lets her daughter beg strangers." "Even worse," another woman sneered, "begging a human. Shameful." Their laughter rose like smoke, curling in the air, and more eyes turned toward the scene. The human could feel the weight of their stares, each one sharp with judgment. The girl's mother rose slowly from her place by the fire. She stepped forward, placing her hand on her daughter's shoulder as if to pull her back. "Do not speak nonsense," she hissed under her breath, her voice low and strained. "You embarrass me." Her eyes flicked to the human with open distrust, as though he were poison that had stumbled into her home. But the girl stood firm. She looked up at her mother, her chin high, even with crumbs still stuck to her lips. "It is not nonsense. He is good. He gave me bread when no one else would. He looked at me, Mother, not like the others." Her words were strong, carrying more weight than a child's should. The mother's lips tightened. For a heartbeat, her eyes betrayed something fragile. Pain, maybe, or fear, but she quickly pushed it down. "Enough," she said, turning her daughter around. "Go inside." The girl shook her head. "No, he should meet you." She turned back to the human and tugged his sleeve again. "Don't go. Stay." The human's throat felt dry. He wanted to speak, to tell them he meant no harm, but the alien voices around him drowned out his thoughts. The crowd had grown larger, forming a half circle of sneering faces. A man spat on the ground near his boots. Another muttered, "Humans are weak. They take what they cannot earn." A wave of unease spread through him, but he did not move. He had faced worse before: loneliness, hunger, violence. Their laughter could not shake him the way their eyes hoped it would. Instead, he focused on the girl, who looked at him with a strange mix of trust and certainty, as though she had seen something in him no one else could. The mother pulled her daughter closer, her hands trembling slightly. "You do not know what you're saying," she whispered, but the whisper carried. "We are already outcasts. Do you wish us to be destroyed too?" The human caught those words, and they cut deep. Outcasts. Destroyed. He suddenly understood. This woman and her child were not only poor, but rejected by their own people. Maybe it was because she was widowed, or because of something else he didn't know yet. But he could feel it in the way the crowd looked at them, with the same coldness they had always shown him. The girl pressed her face against her mother's side, but still spoke, muffled but clear. "He is different, Mother. Can you not see? He does not laugh. He does not hate us. He stayed." Her small fingers gripped her mother's arm, begging her to listen. The mother's eyes lifted to meet the human's again. There was fire in her look, but also a question hidden beneath it. Why was he here? Why had he not turned away when mocked? Why had he fed her daughter? He had no answer to give, only the truth that he could not ignore hunger when he saw it. The whispers in the crowd grew sharper. Pathetic, one woman spat. They think a human can save them. Maybe he wants to own them, another man growled. Like property. Laughter followed, cruel and heavy. The human's fists clenched at his sides. Every instinct told him to leave, to avoid trouble, but something stronger held him in place. He thought of the girl's eyes when she had taken the bread, wide with fear, then glowing with hope. He thought of the mother's tired face, the way her hands trembled when she touched her daughter. And above all, he thought of his own endless loneliness. Perhaps he was as much an outcast as they were. Finally, he found his voice. It was quiet but steady. "I didn't come here to shame you," he said, his words careful, each one heavy. "I only saw a child hungry. That is all." The mother flinched slightly, as if struck by the honesty in his tone. She opened her mouth to reply but stopped, caught between anger and something else, uncertain hope. The girl looked up at her with a smile, whispering again, "See, mother? He is not like them." For a long moment, the world seemed to pause. The laughter from the crowd dulled into a distant hum. The mother stood frozen, staring at the human, as if trying to read the truth carved into his face. Finally, she tightened her grip on her daughter's hand and turned toward the small shelter. "Come inside," she said at last, her voice quiet but sharp. The crowd gasped in disbelief. No one invited a human into their home. But she had. The girl's face lit up, her smile wide and proud. She tugged his sleeve again, urging him to follow. The human hesitated, his heart pounding. The whispers behind him grew louder, mocking, disbelieving, even threatening. But in front of him, the girl's eyes gleamed with hope, and the woman's figure stood in the doorway, waiting with guarded suspicion. Step by step, he moved toward the doorway, leaving the stares and the laughter behind. For the first time in a long while, he felt that maybe he was not completely alone. Something had begun, and no amount of mocking voices could stop it now. Inside the shelter, the air was warmer but heavy, filled with smoke from the small fire that barely kept alive in the cracked pot. The walls were nothing but patched cloth and bent sheets of metal. A faint wind slipped through the holes, carrying the sound of mocking laughter that still echoed outside. The human stood just past the doorway, unsure if he should move closer, but the little girl pulled him inside with the same stubborn strength she had shown before. Her mother followed, closing the torn flap of cloth that served as a door. The voices outside faded, but the weight of silence grew stronger. The woman turned sharply toward her daughter. Her face was tight, her eyes burning with anger and shame. "Why would you say such things?" she snapped, her voice trembling. "Do you know what you have done?" Her daughter shrank back for a moment, then straightened her spine and looked at her mother with unshaken resolve. "I told the truth," the girl said softly. "He is good. You need someone good." The mother's eyes flicked toward the human, sharp and suspicious. He stood still, not daring to speak. He felt like an intruder who had stepped into something private. The mother exhaled slowly, her anger turning to tiredness. She lowered herself to sit by the weak fire, pressing her hands together. Her voice dropped low, almost like a confession. "You do not understand," she told her daughter. "We are already marked. We are already broken. People laugh at us because we are alone. If you tie us to a human, we will be nothing, worse than nothing." The human listened, every word cutting him, though they were not meant for him. He saw the lines in her face, the weariness in her shoulders. She looked not much older than him, yet she carried years of pain. Her hands shook faintly as she held them over the small flame, like someone who had fought too long against cold winds and hunger. The girl knelt beside her, placing her small hands over her mother's. "We are already nothing to them," she whispered, "but to him we are not nothing." She pointed toward the human with her chin, her little eyes glowing with stubborn hope. The mother pressed her lips tight, torn between scolding and silence. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if trying to shut the world out. When she opened them again, they softened just slightly. She looked at the human with suspicion, but also with curiosity she could not hide. "Why?" she asked suddenly, her voice steady and cold. "Why did you give her food? You owe us nothing. No one here helps without a price. What do you want from us?" The question hung in the air like a blade. The human felt it cut at him, but he did not flinch. He answered slowly, choosing each word with care. I wanted nothing, he said. I saw hunger. That was all. The woman studied his face for a long time, searching for lies. She was used to betrayal, used to empty promises that turned into chains. But his eyes did not waver. His words were plain, but they carried weight. Finally, she looked away, unable to hold his gaze. She leaned back, her hands curling into fists in her lap. You are foolish, she muttered, though her voice lacked venom. Kindness is weakness here, and weakness is punished. She spoke more to herself than to him, like someone repeating a lesson burned into her bones. The human felt a spark of anger stir inside him. He had heard words like that before, spoken by men who used cruelty as armor. But looking at her, he did not see cruelty. He saw fear and exhaustion. He saw someone who had carried too much alone. The girl leaned against her mother, resting her head on her arm. He is not weak, she said firmly. They laughed at him, but he did not leave. He stood there. He is strong, mother. The mother's throat worked as she swallowed hard. For a moment, her face broke, and the human caught a glimpse of raw pain she could not hide. She touched her daughter's hair lightly, her fingers trembling. Then, in a low voice, she spoke words she had buried for too long. I cannot protect you anymore, she whispered. I try, but they watch us, waiting for us to fall. Every day I fear they will take you from me, and I have nothing left to fight them with. The human's chest tightened. He had not expected to hear such a confession. He had thought she only despised him, but now he understood. Her hardness was not hatred. It was armor. Armor cracking under the weight of too many battles. He stepped closer, careful not to startle her. You are not alone, he said quietly. Not anymore. The words slipped from him before he even thought, carried by instinct more than reason. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise and disbelief. Not alone? She repeated bitterly. You think standing here for one night will change years of being cast aside? You think your pity can mend what is broken? He shook his head. Not pity, he said firmly. Respect. The word startled her. Respect. No one had offered her that in years. The firelight flickered on her face, showing the storm of emotions fighting inside her. She wanted to push him away, to keep the walls high, but something in her daughter's hopeful eyes and his steady tone made it harder. The girl reached out and took her mother's hand, squeezing it. See, mother? He speaks different. He does not laugh at us. He does not call us names. Maybe he means it. The woman's lips trembled. For a moment, she looked at the human not as an intruder, not as a threat, but as a man. A man who had nothing to gain from helping her, yet still offered kindness. That thought unsettled her more than hatred ever could. She lowered her eyes, afraid of what might grow if she allowed herself to believe. Outside, the voices of the neighbors still echoed faintly, laughing, mocking. But inside, by the weak fire, a fragile thread had formed, thin but unbreakable. The woman still feared it, still doubted it, but she could not deny it was there. And for the first time in many years, she felt something she had nearly forgotten, hope, as small and trembling as the flame before her. The night came heavy over the colony, and the streets emptied except for shadows moving here and there. The human left the shelter, his mind full of the mother's sharp words and the daughter's stubborn hope. He had not planned to stay long, but something inside told him he would not walk away easily. The air was colder now, carrying the smell of smoke and dirt. His boots scraped against the stones as he walked the narrow path toward the small room he called his own. He did not notice the figures following him until it was too late. From the corner of his eye, he caught movement, and then 3 alien men stepped out from an alley, blocking his way. Their faces twisted with cruel smiles, their eyes burning with the kind of hate he had felt since the first day he came here. They were bigger than him, their shoulders broad and their arms thick. One carried a short blade, another held a heavy stick, and the third cracked his knuckles with a grin. Well, look at this, the tallest one sneered. The human thinks he can take what belongs to us. His voice dripped with poison. Another spat on the ground and added, feeding their child? Next, you'll claim the mother. Is that your plan, human? To shame us in front of our own people? Their laughter was sharp, cutting through the quiet night. The human stood his ground. His fists clenched, but his heart pounded in his chest. He had fought before in his life, but this was different. This was not survival against hunger or loneliness. This was hatred from men who wanted him gone. He knew he could run, but running would only make their words true in the eyes of the crowd. He took a slow breath, steadying himself. "I didn't take anything," he said calmly, though his voice was tight. "I gave food to a child. That is all." The man with the stick laughed and swung it lightly in the air. "You think kindness makes you strong? You are nothing here. You should have stayed in your hole, human." Before he could answer, the blade flashed and the tall one lunged. The human dodged just in time, the knife slicing the air close to his ribs. He swung his fist hard, landing it on the attacker's jaw. Pain shot through his knuckles, but the man staggered back with a grunt. The other two rushed forward, the stick slamming against his shoulder, sending a wave of pain down his arm. He bit back a cry and pushed forward, grappling with the second man. They crashed against a wall, fists flying, grunts filling the night. The human's breath grew harsh, but he did not stop. Blow after blow landed on him, yet he refused to fall. He kicked out, striking the stick from the man's hands, then shoved him to the dirt. The third grabbed him from behind, arms tight around his chest, but the human slammed his head backward, cracking into the man's nose. A howl followed, and the grip loosened. Still, the fight was far from over. The tall one with the blade came again, rage twisting his face. He slashed forward, the blade grazing the human's side. Blood warmed his skin, and for a moment his vision blurred. But instead of falling, he roared, shoving forward with raw strength. He grabbed the attacker's wrist, twisting hard until the blade clattered to the ground. Then he drove his knee into the man's stomach, forcing him down to his knees. The other two regrouped, circling him, their eyes full of hate. The human's chest rose and fell quickly, his body screaming in pain, but his will was steel. He stood tall, his fists raised, blood dripping down his side. "I will not run," he growled. His voice carried into the night, louder than their threats. For a moment, the men hesitated. They had expected him to break, to crawl away, to beg for mercy. Instead, he bled and still stood unbroken. They looked at one another, doubt flickering in their eyes. Then, slowly, one by one, they stepped back. The tallest spat blood onto the ground and snarled, "This isn't over, human. You'll regret this." With that, they melted into the shadows, leaving him alone in the silent street. The human bent over, his hands on his knees, his breath ragged. Pain burned in every muscle, but inside his chest there was something stronger than pain. He had not yielded. He had not let them strip away his dignity. He was still standing. A soft sound made him turn his head. From the edge of the shadows, the little girl was watching, her eyes wide with fear. She had followed him secretly, hiding when the men appeared. Now she ran to him, her small hands reaching for his torn shirt. "You're hurt," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. He knelt down slowly, wincing, and touched her shoulder. "It's nothing," he said gently, though blood soaked his side. Her lip trembled, and she called out, "Mother!" From the dark, the woman appeared, her steps quick and unsteady. When she saw him bleeding, her face changed from cold suspicion to shock. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands already reaching for the wound. "Fool," she whispered harshly, her voice breaking. "Why didn't you run?" He looked at her, his breath still uneven, and managed a small, tired smile. "Because running would have proved them right." Her hands trembled as she pressed cloth against his wound, her eyes locked on his face. For the first time, the hardness in her gaze melted, replaced by something raw and real. She had seen many men fall, many men leave, but never one who stood bloodied and still refused to bow. She whispered his name quietly, as though speaking it gave her strength. Around them, the night was still. The danger had passed, but the weight of what happened remained. The mother's fingers lingered on his skin, her breath quick, and the girl pressed close to his side, refusing to let go. Something unspoken passed between them, a bond forged not by words, but by blood, defiance, and the choice to stay when leaving would have been easier. The next morning, the human woke with pain burning in his side where the blade had cut him. The mother had bandaged him with torn cloth through the night, her hands steady even as her eyes showed worry she tried to hide. The little girl had not left his side once, sleeping curled beside the fire, her small fingers gripping the edge of his sleeve as if she feared he might vanish if she let go. He tried to rise, but his body protested. The mother pressed him back down firmly. "You're still weak," she said. Her voice was not soft, but it carried a weight of concern she did not admit. The human only nodded, though inside him a storm brewed. He knew the attack from the men was not the end. They had left with threats in their eyes, and soon the whole colony would speak of it. He was already an outsider, but now, tied to this mother and her child, he would be more than hated. He would be challenged. By midday, the whispers grew louder. The girl returned from fetching water, her face pale. "The elders are calling," she said, her voice trembling. "They want you to come to the council hall." The mother stiffened, her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes dark with fear. "No," she said sharply. "You cannot go. They will humiliate you, maybe worse." The human looked at the girl, then at the mother, and slowly shook his head. "If I refuse, it will be the same. They will still come for me. Better I face them now." His tone was steady, though he felt the weight of what might come. Reluctantly, the mother walked with him, the girl holding tightly to her hand. The path to the council hall wound through the heart of the colony. Dozens of eyes followed them, mocking, judging, curious. Some spat as he passed, others laughed openly. The human kept his head high, his steps even. Inside, anger burned, but he swallowed it, knowing he must not show weakness. The council hall was nothing more than a wide stone platform with tall wooden posts, surrounded by rows of aliens who had gathered to watch. At the center stood the elders, their faces marked with years of power. The tallest elder raised his voice, letting it echo across the space. "Human," he said with disdain, "you have disturbed our peace. You interfere with what does not belong to you. You feed our outcasts, and now you dare stand against our men. Do you think yourself one of us?" The crowd jeered, voices rising like a storm. "Throw him out! Break him! Make him crawl!" The human stood straight, though his wound throbbed. He met the elder's gaze without flinching. "I never claimed to be one of you," he said firmly, "but I will not turn away from a child in need. If that makes me guilty, then judge me guilty." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some laughed, others muttered angrily, but the elders were not amused. The tall one's eyes narrowed. "If you wish to keep standing with the widow and her child, you must prove yourself. Words mean nothing. Only strength and will decide who is worthy." The human frowned. "Prove myself? How?" Another elder leaned forward, his smile cruel. "The trial of blood. If you survive, no one will question your place. If you fail, then your body will feed the dirt." The words fell heavy. The crowd roared with approval, chanting, calling for blood. The little girl clutched her mother's hand tightly, her face pale. "No," she cried out. "You can't make him fight." But her small voice was lost in the sea of shouting. The mother stepped forward, her eyes blazing with fury. "This is madness," she shouted. "He owes you nothing. He is not your enemy." The tall elder sneered at her. "Silence, widow. You are nothing here. You speak because no one has silenced you yet." The insult cut deep, and laughter followed from the crowd. The mother's face burned with shame, but she did not look away. She placed herself between the human and the elders, her hands trembling. "Refuse," she whispered to him urgently. "Walk away. Please. I cannot watch you die." The human looked at her, his heart heavy. He could see the fear in her eyes, the desperation she tried to hide. For a moment, he thought of leaving, of sparing her the pain of seeing him hurt. But then he looked down at the girl, whose small hand clung to her mother's dress, and he remembered her words from the night before. "He is not weak." He stayed. He turned back to the elders, his voice steady and loud. "I accept." The crowd erupted, half in cheers, half in jeers. Some shouted that he was a fool, others laughed and bet against him, while a few watched with quiet interest, as if they sensed something different in him. The elders smirked, satisfied. The trial would entertain them, and if he died, their problem would be solved. The mother's eyes filled with fury and grief. She grabbed his arm, her voice sharp. "Why? Why do this for us? You owe us nothing." The human looked at her, his face calm, though his chest burned with turmoil. "Because walking away would mean they win," he said simply. "And I will not let them win." She stared at him, her lips trembling, her words caught in her throat. For years, she had seen men boast of strength only to abandon their promises. But this man, broken, bleeding, and mocked, stood firm in the face of death. She wanted to curse him, to drag him away, but deep inside, a part of her whispered that maybe, just maybe, he was the one who would not leave. The girl pressed her forehead against the human's arm, tears slipping down her cheeks. Please don't leave us, she whispered. His hand rose slowly, resting on her head with a gentleness that contrasted the storm around them. I'm not going anywhere, he said. The elders announced the trial would begin at the next dawn. The crowd dispersed slowly, voices buzzing with excitement, as if awaiting a spectacle. But for the mother and her child, dread wrapped around their hearts like chains. They knew the trial of blood was not meant to test, it was meant to kill. That night, in the quiet of their broken shelter, the mother sat by the fire, staring at the flames. Her hands twisted the edge of her cloak as she whispered to herself, "He is a fool, a stubborn fool." But her eyes glistened with something more than anger. Fear? Yes, but also a fragile thread of hope she could not cut away, no matter how much she tried. The morning of the trial came with heavy silence across the colony. The sky was gray, and the air felt colder than usual, as if the world itself waited for blood. The human stood in the center of the wide pit, a circle of packed dirt surrounded by tall wooden posts. Around him, dozens of aliens filled the stands, their faces hungry for spectacle. Some cheered for his death, others mocked him openly, while a few watched with quiet curiosity, whispering about whether he could survive even a single strike. The elders sat at the highest point, their expressions carved in stone. They had gathered to judge, but their eyes carried no fairness. To them, this was only a chance to break him publicly. At the edge of the crowd, the mother stood with her daughter, her arms wrapped tightly around the child as if she could shield her from the sight. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a hard line, but her eyes never left him. The human's wound still ached from the fight days before, but he ignored it. His body was tired, yet his spirit burned strong. He had faced hunger, loneliness, and hatred for years. He had no illusions that this would be easy. But he had already chosen. Better to bleed in the dirt than bow before their cruelty. A loud drum echoed through the air, and the first challenger entered the pit. He was huge, his muscles rippling under his skin, his tusks sharp, his eyes filled with scorn. He carried a heavy club carved from bone. The crowd roared his name, placing their bets loudly. He grinned at the human, swinging the club lazily, as if certain the fight would be over in moments. The human braced himself. The giant charged forward, the club swinging with bone-crushing force. The human ducked at the last second, the club slamming into the dirt with a crack. Dust flew upward. Before the giant could recover, the human moved in close, slamming his fist into the alien's ribs. The crowd gasped at the sound, but the giant only laughed, swinging his elbow backward. The blow caught the human on the jaw, sending him stumbling. Blood filled his mouth, but he refused to fall. The fight dragged on, brutal and raw. The giant's strength was overwhelming, but the human's endurance and quick movements kept him alive. He used every ounce of cunning, striking when the giant left himself open, dodging when he could, taking hits when he couldn't. Minutes stretched into eternity, and sweat poured down his face, mixing with the blood. At last, the giant lifted his club for a final strike, but the human stepped forward, driving his shoulder into the alien's chest with all his weight. The giant staggered backward, his balance lost, and with a roar, the human kicked his legs out. The giant crashed into the dirt, gasping for air, unable to rise. The crowd erupted, half in disbelief, half in anger. Some shouted that it was luck, others that the human had cheated, but the elders signaled for the next challenger. There was no time for rest. Another stepped into the pit, and then another after him. Each one was different. Some fast, some brutal, some skilled with blades, but all were determined to see him broken. The human's body became a canvas of bruises and cuts. His side burned from the old wound, his breath came ragged, and his arms ached as though filled with stone. Yet with every fall, he pushed himself up again. With every strike that sent him to his knees, he forced himself to stand. The crowd that had laughed at him began to fall silent, their jeers replaced by uneasy murmurs. The mother's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to look away, to shield her daughter's eyes, but she could not. She had seen men fight before, but never like this. He did not fight for glory or pride. He fought with something else, something that made her chest ache. Every time he rose, even when blood dripped from his skin, it was as if he carried her and her daughter with him. At last, the final challenger entered the pit. He was the fiercest of them all, scarred from past battles, his blade shining with sharpness. He circled the human slowly, his eyes narrowed, measuring him. The crowd leaned forward, breathless, sensing this would be the end. The blade flashed, faster than the others. The human barely dodged, the steel grazing his arm. Pain flared, but he ignored it. Again and again, the blade came, slicing air, cutting shallow lines into his skin. The human's breath grew heavier, his vision blurred, but deep inside, a fire refused to die. He remembered the little girl's hand on his sleeve, her whispered words, "Please don't leave us." He remembered the mother's trembling hands as she bandaged him, her voice breaking when she begged him to refuse. He remembered every laugh, every insult, every stone thrown at his door. And from that fire, he found strength. The next time the blade came down, he did not retreat. He stepped forward, grabbing the warrior's wrist with iron grip. Blood flowed down his own arm, but he twisted with all his weight, forcing the blade free. The warrior snarled, but before he could react, the human struck him across the jaw. Then again, and again, until the warrior collapsed into the dirt. The human dropped the blade beside him, refusing to use it for the final blow. Instead, he stood over the defeated man, chest heaving, bloodied but unbroken. Silence fell. The crowd that had mocked him, the elders who had doubted him, even the mother who feared for him, all stared in disbelief. A human, beaten and blood-soaked, had endured every challenger and still stood tall. The mother's hand covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. The little girl clapped her hands wildly, crying out, "He did it! He's strong! I told you, Mother!" The elders could not deny what they had seen. One of them rose slowly, his face tight with anger but bound by law. "The trial is finished," he declared. "He has earned his place." The human lifted his head, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found the mother and her daughter. His body screamed with pain, but inside a quiet strength settled. He had not fought for their approval, but he had won something greater, the right to stand beside the ones who believed in him. The mother's lips trembled as she whispered his name. For the first time, she looked at him not with suspicion, but with something new, something fragile, dangerous, and full of hope. The pit was empty now, the dust still hanging in the air from the last fight. The human stood swaying on his feet, his body torn and bleeding, but his head remained high. The crowd had fallen silent, not out of respect, but out of shock. They had expected to see a broken man dragged out of the dirt, not someone who had endured every challenger and still refused to fall. The elders exchanged uneasy looks, their pride wounded, but the law was clear. He had survived, he had won, and no one could deny him his place. The little girl broke the silence first. She pushed past the legs of the crowd, running straight into the pit, her small arms wrapped around the human's waist, careful not to touch his wounds. "I knew it," she cried with a wide smile. "I told you, Mother. He is perfect. He is strong. He will not leave us." Her voice rang through the air, clear and innocent, cutting sharper than any blade. The human looked down at her, his lips pulling into a tired smile. He raised his heavy hand and rested it on her head gently. The mother walked slowly toward him, her steps heavy, her face pale. Every part of her body trembled, as if she was holding back something too big to contain. She stopped just in front of him, her eyes fixed on his blood-covered face. For a long time, she did not speak. The human thought she might turn away, that her pride would not let her admit what she felt. But then, her lips parted, and her voice came soft, almost breaking. "You fool," she whispered. "Why would you suffer all this? Why risk your life for us?" The human's voice was low, steady despite the pain. "Because no one should be left alone. Not you, not her, not anyone." His words were simple, but the truth in them hit her harder than any speech could. Her eyes burned, her throat tightened, and she reached out without thinking. Her hands pressed against his chest, feeling his heart pounding beneath the wounds. The crowd began to murmur again. Some laughed in disbelief, others shook their heads with disgust. "Look at her," a voice spat, "throwing herself to a human." Another shouted, "She's lost what little honor she had left." Their voices rose, cruel and cutting, but the mother did not move away. For once, she did not care about their stares or their laughter. She looked up at the elders, her back straightening, her voice louder now. He stood where no one else would. He bled, he fought, and he did not run. "Tell me, who among you has done the same for me? For my child?" Her words silenced many, cutting through the air with truth too sharp to deny. The elders frowned, but they did not answer. The human tried to speak again, but his strength faltered. His knees buckled slightly, and the girl screamed, holding on to him tightly. The mother caught him before he could fall, her arms surprisingly strong as she steadied his body. She looked at him with fierce determination, her voice trembling but clear. "You are not alone anymore," she said. "Not while I still breathe." The little girl nodded eagerly, her face glowing with joy. "We are together now. A family." The human's chest tightened at those words. He had never imagined such a thing. For so long, he had lived as an outsider, a shadow no one wanted. And now, here was a child calling him family, and a woman who had once looked at him with suspicion, now holding him as if he belonged. His throat grew thick, his eyes stung, but he held the moment close like a flame against the cold. The elders finally rose, their faces grim. One of them declared, "By the law, he has earned his right. No one here may challenge his place with the widow and her child." Their voices lacked warmth, but the words could not be undone. The law bound them, and the crowd had to accept it. Some hissed with anger, others muttered curses, but no one stepped forward to deny what had been won. The mother guided the human out of the pit, her arm firm around him. The girl skipped beside them, her small hand gripping his tightly. They walked past the crowd together. Whispers followed them, mocking, bitter, but also fearful. For no matter what was said, the truth was clear. The human had stood against them all and survived. Back at the shelter, the mother cleaned his wounds again, her hands gentler than before. The firelight flickered across her face, showing lines of exhaustion, but also something softer. She did not speak much, only glanced at him from time to time, her eyes filled with thoughts she could not yet say aloud. The little girl hummed quietly as she prepared more cloth, her small face glowing with happiness. For her, this was simple. He had stayed, he had fought, and now he was theirs. The human lay back against the wall, every muscle aching, but his heart strangely light. He listened to the crackle of the fire, the sound of the girl's soft laughter, and the quiet movements of the mother. For the first time in years, the silence around him did not feel empty. It felt full of life, of belonging, of something fragile yet real. Later that night, when the girl had fallen asleep, the mother sat across from him. Her eyes met his, and she held his gaze without fear. "I don't know what tomorrow will bring," she said quietly. "They will not stop hating us. They may try again, but if you are truly staying..." Her voice broke, and she looked away, her hands trembling. "I'm staying," he said firmly, cutting through her doubt. Her eyes returned to him, wide with shock, then soft with something warmer. She nodded slowly, her lips curving just slightly, almost like a smile she had forgotten how to make. She whispered, "Then we will face it together." The human closed his eyes, letting the warmth of her words sink deep inside him. He had come into this colony as nothing, hated and unwanted. But now, in the quiet of the broken shelter, with a child calling him family and a woman who finally believed in him, he had found what he thought he never would, a place to belong and people to fight for.